I started working in finance at 19 years old. I've built two $20 million asset management practices in my 20s. And now at 32, I run a nationwide Canadian financial planning firm, and I've been featured in almost every major news outlet across the country. This video is for people who are actually looking for practical takeaways on how to improve their financial life. And I'm going to compress 13 years of no BS financial advice into this single video. Number one is get your financial foundation set first and everything else comes later. Last year, I met with a couple who wanted to build a business, but they were already in personal debt and they had high incomes. But even though they had high incomes, they were unable to manage their current situation. I told them flat out that a business is a horrible idea right now because they haven't even been able to master their financial situation with stable, secure incomes. How in the world are they going to do it with variable incomes, months with no income, paying their own taxes and managing their own business expenses? Essentially, they were trying to build a house before they had a foundation set. If people try to do this and skip this foundation step, the bad habits that cause them to go into debt are going to cause that house to crumble. A financial foundation consists of having an emergency fund and paying off your consumer debts. I'm not talking necessarily about a mortgage or car loan. I'm talking about credit cards. I'm talking about unsecured lines of credits. There are three practical takeaways from this first step that I'm going to give you. Number one is you need to find out what's going in your accounts and what's coming out on a monthly basis, and guessing on this is not an option. So this is what you need to do. What you're going to do is you're going to open Excel. There's a multiple budgeting format tools there. But first thing you're going to do is download all your bank statements and credit card statements for the past 3 months. You're going to find out what's going in and what's going out. You can directly download these statements in Excel or CSV format files and then simply do simple Excel calculations to find out what's going out every month. You're going to take the average of the last 3 months and you're going to multiply that times 3. That is your required savings for any emergency that's going to come up. Number two, and this is important if you have high interest debt, you're going to start what we call the snowball method. So years ago when I was actually looking into how to debt plan and how to make sure that people are emotionally engaged in paying off debt and kind of some of the emotional barriers people have to making smart financial decisions, I came across this ridiculously simple but extremely effective way to get out of debt. So it's called the snowball method, but also this is a way of gamifying the snowball method. I'm going to quickly explain what the snowball method is first. So basically what you do is you label out all of your debts. So you've got credit cards, you've got one with 1,000, one with 3,000, one with 5,000. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to start by paying off the smallest debt first, and then you're going to pay off that debt, close it, move on to the next smallest one, and so on and so forth until all your debts have been paid off. What this does is it allows for small, easy wins along the way and real progress to be shown. So in this case, what this couple did that was so fascinating and so simple that anyone can do is they gamified paying off debt. And this has been psychologically shown to help people pay off debt sooner. So I encourage, if you're in high interest debt, take a variation of this and do it. So they built this simple scoreboard. It was a ring paper snake. You know when you cut out those rings of colored paper and then you tape them together to form that snake? Anyways, they had $10,000 of debt and each ring on that paper snake represented $1,000 of debt. And every time they would pay off $1,000 of debt, they would simply cut a ring off the snake until they were finished. This created this easy visual for them to know if they were on track to their financial goals, and it allowed them to celebrate these small wins along the way. So not only were they employing the snowball method where they took small debts first and then gradually worked their way up to larger debts, they also had this amazing scoreboard. So that's a really crucial takeaway here if anyone here is in high interest debt. Number three, you have to make sure you have the right mindset around the foundational piece. So when you're building a foundation in a house, no one's ever going to see that foundation. The only evidence of a good foundation is if that house is still standing in 30 years. And it's the same thing with your finances. If you think about the fact that, well, no one's going to see this financial decision that I make. It's not like I can buy a car and people think I have status because I have a nice car in the driveway. No one's ever going to see this. And that is an emotional barrier for many people because they would rather go out and buy a nice BMW or Mercedes than they would to just develop a high interest savings account where they have 3 months of emergency expenses or pay off their consumer loans. So in this case, understand that no one's going to see this, but what this is going to do for you is this is going to set you up so that 30 years down the road, you have a house that's still standing. You have a financial foundation that is standing on solid ground. And to make sure that who cares if no one sees this, I know internally that I'm setting myself up for success so that maybe one day I can drive the BMWs, I can drive the Mercedes, I can have the cottages, I can have these nice things without feeling guilty about the fact that I actually am drowning here while looking looking successful on the outside. The next piece of no BS financial advice is that you have to set singular goals that are wildly important to you and stick to it. One of the best books I've ever read is The 4 Disciplines of Execution by Chris McChesney and Sean Covey and Jim Hewling. And in this book, it talks about having one wildly important goal, or WIG as they call it. This can be anything from starting an emergency savings account to saving $100,000 by the end of this year. Now, in order to actually set goals that stick, you have to make sure that your goal is specific, is measurable, is achievable, is relevant, and is time bound. Because if you don't set goals with those parameters, then you're basically just creating a wish list with no action plan or action items that can actually help it get done. An example of this would be by December 31st of the current calendar year, I will have set aside 15% of my gross income into my investment plans in order to accomplish my longer term retirement goals. An example of something that is not a SMART goal is I'm going to save more money this month. Well, that's a great intention, but it's not a goal. The next thing you have to ensure is that the goal that you're setting towards gets funded before any discretionary expenses or anything else. So for example, if your goal is to set aside 15% of your gross income on a monthly basis, then you need to ensure that before you spend money on clothes, before you spend money on discretionary items, on golf, on memberships or whatever, that 15% is set aside the first instance your checking account gets hit with that direct deposit. And so in doing that, you are prioritizing your wildly important goal. You'll also be able to, instead of saving what's left over, you spend what's left over. If at the end of the month you don't have enough money for those new shoes, that's okay. You've hit your savings goal. The next thing you need to do is that you need to create a visual scoreboard. This can be anything from like a digital scoreboard that you build on your computer to a actual physical piece of paper where you have like a bar meter and a savings target. And you need to ensure that what you are doing is trackable. So if your goal is to set aside 15%, and let's say that equals $3,000 in the current month, then you need to ensure that the second that $3,000 gets saved or invested, you need to check that box on your scorecard to know that you're on track to achieving your goal. The next thing is you need to create systems and have a focus on things that actually influence the outcome instead of just looking backwards in hindsight and wondering if you accomplished it. This is the difference in something called a lead measure and a lag measure. A lag measure will tell you whether or not you actually saved 15% of your income. A lead measure will actually influence whether or not you can save 15% of your income. So for example, if you need to save 15% of your income, a lead measure could be that you need to cut down on your Uber Eats because that is taking up too much discretionary spending, meaning that if you don't cut back on Uber Eats, you can't save 15% of your income. That has a direct influence on your ability to save 15% of your income. Another lead measure will be to automate your savings. If you automate your savings, then the first time that direct deposit hits your account, you know exactly how much that's going to be. An exact amount gets debited from your bank account into your investment account. And that way it's taken out of your hands and it directly influences your ability to actually accomplish your goal of saving 15% of your income. So what you want to do is you want to set up a number of these lead measures, and then every single month you look backwards on if you've accomplished your goal. That's the lag measure. But also if you implemented the lead measures. Now every month you can come up with new lead measures as you study your situation and find things that can influence the outcome. But here's the piece that most people miss, and it's having an accountability partner in all of this. Look, if you don't have an accountability partner, you might do well for a few months, but at the end of the day, you're going to find a reason to fail. But having that accountability partner will ensure that you stay on track to meet this goal. And I can't stress how important this is, because if you can master this in your personal financial life, you can also master this in other areas of your life. Like think about if you run a business and you need to set business targets. If you can't master how you do this personally, how are you going to hold your people accountable in a business setting? If you run an organization or if you manage a team, this will help you in every single area of your life. Number 3, every level of financial success that you're likely to achieve will be based on the level of risk that you're willing to take. Risk and reward go hand in hand. You cannot expect outsized returns on activity without risk being in the equation. The key thing to understand though is there is a certain type of risk that is good to take and a certain type of risk that will crush you. The risk that I'm talking about that is good to take is something called compensated risk, where there is a reasonable expectation of return for the risk that you're willing to take. I could say that it's risky to invest your money in the stock market, but you have a higher likelihood of achieving good returns. You could say, great, with that mindset, I'm going to buy 2 stocks stocks and I'm going to reap the rewards. And that is actually not the case. That is something we call uncompensated risk because there is not a high probability of that being successful. Alternatively, if you think, well, stocks are risky, so therefore I'm going to keep my money on the sidelines and invest in GICs or high interest savings accounts, that is also risky. Not a risk of losing your money. The risk is that you will not keep up with inflation. Inflation erodes purchasing power, meaning in 30 years from now, $100,000 that you left on the sidelines in real dollars will be worth less than $100,000 when you need to use it. So there's risk there too. Risk comes part and parcel with financial success. And if you're not willing to understand risk to the level of enabling it to make good financial decisions, then you're never going to become as wealthy as you can be. Now, I'm not talking about taking excess risk for no reason. I recently was talking to a couple who talked to me about leveraging their home equity into the stock markets. And when we did the analysis, we found out that they could retire at 50 without doing that. So I asked them, do you want to still do this? And they said, there's no point. Because yes, even though it could marginally impact their net worth at retirement, maybe even give them $1 million of extra net worth, it just simply wasn't needed, so they didn't do it. The level of risk they were willing to take was such that they wanted it to accomplish a specific goal. And so we said, let's not do this and we'll keep your money invested as is. We won't touch your home equity. Your home's going to be paid off soon and we're going to ensure that you're able to accomplish your retirement goals. So you have to understand that there's risk that's compensated, risk that's uncompensated, and every level of success that you're likely to achieve in your life when it comes to your finances is a factor of the level of risk that you're willing to take. However, not all risk is treated equally. Number 4, you need to talk to people who've actually had financial success and ask them what the most important pieces to them were to actually gain that success. Now I'm not talking about peers. I'm talking about someone like 15 years ahead of you. And this is what you should not ask them for. Don't ask them for stock tips or don't ask them for like what to invest in. Ask them for the behaviors they implemented that enabled them to achieve success. When you do that, what you'll likely find is that they were disciplined, they were motivated, and that they had plans in place. And if you don't have these plans in place, if you're not disciplined and you're not motivated to achieve a certain goal, look, at the end of the day, you might get lucky, but that's not something to rely on. So make sure that you find out peer groups or where I call them peer mentors, someone who's like 10 years or 15 years ahead of me, still current, understanding the current struggles that, people go through, but who's had success in the areas I'm looking to achieve success in. They can help me along the way. Number 5, do more of what's already working. So many people that I know accumulate $500,000 or $1 million and they come to me and they say, Sam, I need to diversify. I need to set up a trust. I need to, invest in alternative assets or real estate or whatever. And I'm just sitting there like, dude, what's worked to get you here can work to build another $2 to $3 million of wealth. Because often we think we've made it when we've hit a certain point and we need to diversify further, or we need to change our strategy because now we've hit a certain wealth level. At the end of the day, maybe that's true, but it's much higher wealth levels than you think. It's not 500,000, it's not $1 million. Oftentimes it's not even 3 million. So if you experience that level of success, you're at 500,000, you're at $1 million because you saved diligently, you invested wisely, keep doing those things. You don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need to get into alternative asset classes. You don't need to get into real estate just because you've built a successful portfolio. Now you want to diversify. If you're in well-diversified index funds, if you're a good saver, those things can catapult you into massive levels of wealth without going into other complicated and expensive opportunities and areas in the market. Number 6, you need to educate yourself on who's actually there to help you and who is there to take advantage of you in the market when it comes to financial advice. So most people will think of financial advisors and they'll think of the banks, but I need you to hear me say this. The banks do not care about giving you good financial advice. They have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to make money. And that comes at the expense of you. And now sometimes there's good people in the banks who will give good service, but you have to understand the way that they're trained from the top down. And I can tell you this from experience. They need you to be a source of revenue for their shareholders, for their branch. And so you need to understand who's actually working for you out there and take the advice through that lens. That comes with a big responsibility to be financially literate and have the resources available so that you can actually make wise financial decisions. So I'm putting the onus on you. Like I said, this is a no BS video. Do you want to be financially successful? Learn about investing. Learn about tax. Learn about spending decisions and financial habits that can help you become wealthy. Because a good financial planner that's actually working for you will be pretty powerless to help you do anything if you come to them empty-handed with no foundation, no financial habits. What financial advisors do for you is they take and build on the foundation that you've already built. You've got the savings account, the emergency savings, and the cash available. You need help on knowing what to invest your money in, how to pay less taxes, and how to build plans that stick. But if you don't know investing, at least at a high level, there's a good chance that you're going to get taken advantage of, or at the very least, put in subpar products that are going to achieve subpar results over long time periods. There are 2 books I'm going to recommend you read to get better educated around emotional decisions when it comes to money. Number 1 is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and number 2 is The Behavior Gap by Carl Richards. You can see The Psychology of Money behind me and Behavior Gap's on my shelf as well. Those are 2 fundamental books that are written for people like you to better understand how to make financial decisions. There's also a really good book called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion that Warren Buffett actually credited as a useful tool to help flush out when someone's selling something versus when someone's giving advice or actually giving you good information. So I highly recommend you read that book as well. But listen, guys, as much as we want to say that the financial system in North America is good and upstanding, chances are if you come in unarmed with information, if you come in with no good financial habits, there is little a financial advisor can do for you in the way of good and a lot they can do for you in the way of harm. And I've seen it firsthand. So please educate yourself and ensure that you are armed with information the next time you walk into a bank or an advisor's office. Number 7, think in decades, not months. When you're coming up with a big financial decision, like let's say you're buying a new vehicle, or let's say you want to go on a vacation, or things like that, I'm a big proponent of making sure that you enjoy your life by living in the moment, but you also have to understand the long-term impact of a big financial decision. Einstein called investing the 8th wonder of the world and said, he who understands it earns it, he who does not understand it pays it. So either you're going to compound positively or you're going to compound negatively. When you think of long-term financial decisions, what you have to understand is that $100,000 spent on a truck that you really, really like is actually about $400,000 in 30 years from now. That is not going to be sitting in your retirement accounts. And if you're in a position where that won't matter to you, then that's okay. Go and spend the money. But if you're in a position where you're like, well, I'll just make it up later, that's a bad financial decision. Warren Buffett used to, and this is an extreme, I'm not encouraging you to do this, but Warren Buffett used to not get haircuts for, I think like at the time it was like $2 because he said, well, I could put that money in the stock market and it'll be worth, $14 in a few years. And so the way he thought, which is again an extreme, but is a way that we can all learn and think about long-term decision making. So when we're thinking about how much money we should spend on non-essentials, when we're thinking about doing something out of enjoyment, which I wholeheartedly encourage people to do after their financial foundation is built, we also do have to kind of keep one eye on retirement that whole time to make sure that we're not robbing our future selves by spending dollars today. Number 8 is know how to say no. The ability to decline a bad investment, an impulse purchase, or a lifestyle upgrade is going to be more valuable than any financial product you can choose to invest in. Disciplined people know this. They do not let their emotions, peer pressure, or anything else get in the way of making a sound and rational financial decision. And it's hard to make rational financial decisions in a vacuum. So that's why you need to make sure that you have trusted financial partners in your life that they can be a sounding board with you for. When I was thinking about buying a house back in 2020, the mortgage interest rates were dirt cheap. I got the opportunity to get a variable rate mortgage of about 1.79% or a fixed rate mortgage of 2.25% for 5 years. Now, obviously the 1.79 was a really attractive offer and I thought about it really hard, but I was like, you know what? I think we're at market bottom. And I talked to a bunch of my other friends about this who were in finance as well. And I said, they can't get cheaper from here. So meaning we're never going to see cheaper variable rates. But what could happen is the market could go back up, right? We could see interest rates start to rise again. And that's a likelier scenario than interest rates going down from 0.25%. So I said, you know what? I'm going to lock in a 5-year fixed rate at 2.25%. And the reason I was able to make that decision was because I had good people in my corner that were basically telling me, saying, Sam, even if rates stay the same, 2.25% is a historically low interest rate that you will be okay with. And so making decisions like that with people who can act as a sounding board for you is going to be way better than being peer pressured into situations because of a lack of knowledge and not having people in your corner who actually understand what they're talking about to give you good advice. So don't let impulse purchases, lifestyle upgrades, or peer pressure influence you to make bad investment decisions. It's going to be one of those things where you cannot make these decisions in isolation. You cannot let your friends peer pressure you into making bad financial decisions. You need to have financial professionals in your corner to bounce these ideas off of and to make sure that you are making good financial decisions with your money. Number 9, the best financial financial decision is the one you can actually stick to. I do a lot of work on trying to optimize client situations, and I'll take a look at these saving strategies and these tax strategies. And one thing I learned a long time ago though was sometimes I can overwhelm clients with information and to-do lists and none of it ends up getting done. So the best thing to do is to start small and to work our way up to actually implementing large scale financial changes. So when we think about optimizing or choosing the best path forward, that's always a good starting point. But if we can't stick to that optimized path, then the whole thing is useless. I love the saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If we can say, we know the optimal portfolio is this, but getting them invested is better than having their cash on the sidelines, and they're not comfortable with the optimal portfolio, so we're gonna start here where at least they're getting some return for their investment, that's better than nothing. That's something they can stick to. Or we know the optimal plan will be budgeting intensely and paying down $1,500 of debt every month, but realistically speaking, that's unsustainable, so we're gonna start with a $500 target. That is better than nothing. We wanna make sure that we don't over-optimize to the point where we're treating ourselves like robots instead of humans with emotions and swings and all of these things, and make sure that we're actually setting up plans that are achievable and actionable. Number 10, the markets are gonna do things you've never seen before. You need to build in the expectation of uncertainty into your financial plans. Our fear of the markets has no bearing on what the markets are actually going to do. They're going to bring you a new surprise at least once every 3 to 4 years. Every single one of those things are going to be called unprecedented by the media. They're doing that to incite fear. Your best course of action is to build a financial plan that takes into account the ability to navigate through and survive surprises, that is not totally dependent on you getting 10% returns every year, but building a plan that has a high probability of surviving those events, which you can do. We can build out these probabilistic analysis of like, what if the market drops 30%, or what if the worst possible thing happens at the worst possible time? Are you still on track to accomplishing your financial goals? All of those things can be built in, not with 100% certainty, but with enough certainty to know that, look, when the next surprise happens, you are in control of your reaction to it. And as long as you don't make a bad choice in that moment, as long as you don't do things like trying to sell out of fear, you're going to be okay. But you have to plan for those things. You have to understand the markets are going to give you surprises, and you have to understand that your best course of action is to stay the course and stick to an original plan, and that you can't control the markets, but you can control how you react to them. My name's Sam. I'm a CFP professional in Canada. Do me a favor, if you like this video, send it to a friend that would see some value in it, and please be sure to subscribe down below, and I'll see you in the next video.